The Brexiteers are never, ever in a month of Sundays going to accept that the problem with Brexit is Brexit itself, and essentially the economic and political realities that we are an island nation who sits at the edge of a continent who is part of Europe, but according to its political leaders, should not be anywhere part of it politically or economically. And ultimately, that is their goal for some bizarre reason. And yet, it is the most bizarrest of bizarre things that Brexit indeed actually ever happened, because you've got like the two titans that conservatives love to invoke, both Winston Churchill and Margaret Thatcher, who both in their times favored exclusively economic European integration and economic and European political partnerships. So it is bizarre that this even comes out to it. But this, of course, came, during the split during Margaret Thatcher's tenure, where she went full market, free market fundamentalist. And a lot of conservatives were like, whoa, why are we joining Europe? Why are we part of this? We should be out of this. We should, and of course, that's what drove them into this mad, chaotic frenzy in the first place. And again, ever since then, the Conservatives have just been, well, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs about Euroscepticism and leaving it. And like I've said before, British Euroscepticism is an entirely separate beast from like the continental European Euroscepticism. They might like to think that they have stuff in common, but in reality, they couldn't be any more different. It's a horse of a completely different color. But we're not talking about their ideology today. We're talking about the blame game, because if you know anything about Brexit and have been following it for all this time, Brexiteers love to blame someone else for all their faults and failings of their grand project. After all, it's not the fact that there was never any policy attached to Brexit. It must be someone else's fault. It's Remainers' fault, even though, again, we had no power. It's Labour's fault, even again, they were the ones not in power. Like I say, they like to blame everyone at least twice a day, maybe 3 times a day, if they can get away with it. And of course, their new target, of course, is Michel Barnier, who apparently will be going up for the running of French president. So before we do get into this fascinating new piece of blame that we are getting from the Brexiteers, please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for all the people who do support the channel that way. So on with today's article. This comes from the Yorkshire Bylines, and the title is Brexit. It's all Barnier's fault. Despite 5 years of near constant debate about Brexit, many of its leading advocates still fundamentally misunderstand the way the European Union actually works. One of these is Martin Lynn, a financial journalist writing for various Brexit-supporting newspapers and magazines. His latest effort in The Spectator, with chairman Andrew Neil, is a prime example. He suggests that Michel Barnier, who recently announced himself as a candidate in next year's French presidential elections, would be a disaster for Britain because of his, quote, hardline stance meant both sides ended up with a far worse deal than was necessary, and an atmosphere of mutual mistrust and suspicion that will take years, if not decades, to repair. So, did Barnier actually behave that way? Well, again, if you followed the Brexit negotiations like myself, you know that is completely false. Like I say, David Davis literally turned up to the first Brexit meeting with not even papers and a pen to write stuff down with. And yet somehow it's Barnier's fault. So, The implication is that Barnier conducted the negotiations on behalf of himself, and in doing so caused untold economic damage to both Britain and his employer, the European Union. Lim seems to assess that Barnier wielded massive dictatorial power over the supplying member states. In fact, Barnier negotiated the trade deal according to the detailed mandate drawn up by the member states. They dictated to him what he could and could not do, and exactly as they did with the withdrawal agreement negotiation. There were times, particularly when negotiations became tense and even threatened to reach stalemate, that Barnier even wanted to offer Britain concessions, but was prevented from doing so, notably by the French President Emmanuel Macron. And that the final deal was so close to the EU's intended mandate is a testament to Barnier's skill in maintaining unity between the EU 27 and the unique nature of the trading relationship. It is also telling that there appears to be an absence of debate in EU capitals about renegotiating this damaging deal. Barnier has, if anything, enhanced his own reputation in European circles. Tom Hayes is the executive director of the BERG, the Brussels European Employee Relations Group, a labour relations consultancy, and he's no stranger to hard negotiating. His response to Lynn Peace on Twitter was this: "Sometimes you just can't let it go. You've got to respond." Hayes has also written an excellent paper that describes the EU's chief negotiator of the handling of Brexit processes in what he would describe as a masterclass in negotiating processes. It stems from Barnier's book, The Old Legrand Illusion, out now in hardback. The solid foundations were laid immediately after the referendum. The EU consulted widely and defined its objectives clearly. It put together an experienced team that was always on top of the details and built a firm consensus. By being transparent and keeping the other EU 27 ambassadors and governments informed at all times, there were never any surprises. Meanwhile, Theresa May struggled to even get 20 members of her cabinet to actually agree, and the whole process was shrouded in secrecy from start to finish. There were never any clear objectives, and now we have nothing but the nasty shocks. The key difference between the two sides was that the EU 27 based their mandate on limiting the damage, that they were realistic in a way that the Brexiteers were basically not, and they managed expectations. Britain was unable to leverage any of its delusions that held the Brexit coalition together. The sunlit uplands have vanished like a mirage and have failed to see any of the entirely predictable consequences of Brexit. Enthusiastic supporters like Lynn are now trying to shift the blame onto others. However, Hayes and Barnier are not alone in knowing how to conduct successful negotiations. Mrs. May also knew how to approach the talks with a body like the European Union, although when it actually came to doing so, she didn't apply her own advice. When May was the shadow leader of the Commons, she co-authored a pamphlet together with her advisor, Nick Timothy, who now writes for The Telegraph and was forced out following the 2017 election disaster, about the UK's democratic deficit. And this was back in 2007, during the run-up to the signing of the Lisbon Treaty. The pamphlet was published by Politica, and it hails Denmark as the example of how a government's negotiators could be made accountable to Parliament. The pair explained how the Danish ministers must by law appeal before the European Affairs Committee of the Folketing, the Danish Parliament, to obtain a mandate for negotiating on anything directly applicable in Denmark, or whether the implementation requires Parliament support. May and Timothy called for an equivalent British security reserve to be put on a statutory basis. This would mean that ministers are required to come before the European Security Committee before negotiations at the European Council. It would therefore be impossible to override it. Ministers have to set out the negotiating position to the committee and gain its approval. Perversely, in 2016, the two of them, then acting entirely alone, went on to make a momentous decision to try and leave the single market and the customs union. There was no conciliation with colleagues, Parliament, or stakeholders in the industry, no cabinet discussion, no security approval committee, no mandate, no consensus. Virtually all our present difficulties can be tracked back to this very decision. Strange how trying to fulfill a democratic deficit that seemed so attractive in opposition becomes less so in government. So, Lynn at the moment is the financial columnist and author. He writes currently for the Wall Street Journal's Market Watch and The Spectator Money Week, as well as The Telegraph, The Sunday Times, and Bloomberg. He's fortunate to make a living out of getting his opinion out to the lofty economic matters, although he does not seem well suited to offering such advice. In August of 2016, he predicted that within a year, growth in the UK will be far ahead of the rest of Europe, and even our export to the rest of the continent will be up. He cautioned about unsustainable the demanded lend boom, and in fact, we sank to the bottom of the G7 growth league. And in the last 5 years, the UK economy on average has shrunk by 1% a year, while the Eurozone has enjoyed a small amount of growth. And of course, in December of 18, the first potential no-deal exit loomed, which he asserted that the difficulties Remainers claimed would happen were simply myths, that the ports would stay open and the trucks will still roll through, medicine would keep throwing and the city would have a good year. He said the fruit will still be picked and the factories will keep running. It will not go unnoticed that the present disruption to food production and supply chains are largely down to Brexit. We have happened after we negotiated a deal, and there are now a gentle, very much headwinds compared to the hurricane that would have engulfed us under a no-deal conditions. And of course, last Christmas Eve, Lynn actually welcomed the trade deal. He now says that was far worse than necessary. He suggested that with regulatory divergence, the UK will steadily pull ahead of its rivals such as France and Germany and match the USA by being more innovative, attractive, and more to capital than our companies will seize markets far more quickly than they otherwise would have done. Nearly 9 months later, and after years of internal wrangling and endless red tape initiatives, we still have no idea what way UK regulations will diverge from the EU. And the much vaunted UKCA certification to try and replace the Silima CE mark has now been deferred for yet another year due to the lack of the British certifying bodies. But never mind, it must all be down to Barnier's hardline stance. And again, it just goes to show you the sheer level of how this completely went completely wrong and off the rails. Like I say, probably not yet, but eventually someone will do like the defining documentary of Brexit, being from like when the referendum happened, like the morning after, right through to 2020 and what subsequently happened after. And I always say from about, 2017 to mid 2017, where May did her infamous Chequers speech, which really, shall we say, kickstart everything, and then right up until obviously we left, that period of history really needs to be documented and looked at, and getting first-hand accounts from people and interviewing the people involved. I think that would be a fantastic documentary to do and to create. Because it's all there, what happened, all the disastrous decisions it makes, all the things that are happening now were born just a few years ago. And as we've always said, Brexit was going to be dead on arrival because there were no policies, there was no direction, there was no clear objectives. So Brexit will never be allowed to, quote, fail by the Brexiteers, because to them, there will always be someone to blame, and there will always be some minuscule crumpet or crumb that they can squeeze out into being some profound Brexit benefit. But there you go. And of course, we will be continuing to report on those as they come and arrive at our doorstep. So As always, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.